Stephen and Carol led a modest life, but they were rich in something money could never buy: love. He, a 60-year-old man with calloused hands from years of hard work, had always been the pillar of the family. She, at 59, carried a serene demeanor and an inner strength that only mothers and grandmothers with boundless hearts seemed to possess. Bound by destiny and unconditional love, they became the cornerstone of Luna's life, their 7-year-old granddaughter. Luna's arrival in their care wasn't planned, but it was accepted with open hearts, even amidst pain. When Luna was just a baby, a tragic car accident claimed the lives of her parents. The grief was immense, but Stephen and Carol didn't let it consume them because they now had a reason to keep going, raising Luna, giving her everything that could fill the void left by her parents, and ensuring she grew up surrounded by love. They lived in a small, simple house in a quiet little town where life moved slowly. Money was scarce, but what they lacked in their wallets, they made up for with an abundance of affection and the small gestures that made daily life worthwhile. Stephen and Carol worked hard to keep their home, yet they always made time for Luna. They taught her valuable lessons: the importance of kindness, gratitude, and cherishing the little things. Despite her young age, Luna reflected the love she received. A bright-eyed girl with golden hair, she was full of energy and joy. She loved running around the backyard, playing with animals and inventing stories that made her grandparents laugh. Her smile was contagious, and for Stephen and Carol, it was the greatest gift they could ever receive. Looking at Luna, Stephen often told Carol, "She's the light that guides us. No matter what happens, we'll protect her and make sure she has a life full of happiness." And so, in that modest house with limited material resources but overflowing love, they created a haven where Luna could grow up safely, surrounded by care and warmth. For Stephen and Carol, nothing mattered more than the well-being of the little soul who had transformed their lives. It was a day like any other at Stephen and Carol's home. The sun was shining in the sky, and Luna, with her boundless energy, was playing in the backyard. She chased after a ball, laughing loudly, while her grandparents watched her with proud smiles. It was in moments like these that Stephen and Carol felt grateful because, despite all the challenges, they had a home full of love and a granddaughter who brought so much joy into their lives. Suddenly, Luna's laughter stopped. Stephen, who had been tending to the garden, heard a dull thud and, looking up, saw Luna collapsed on the ground. The world around him seemed to stop. "Luna!" he shouted, running to pick her up in his arms. Carol rushed out of the house when she heard her husband's desperate cry. The little girl was unconscious and panic set in. Without wasting time, they took her to the small town hospital. On the way, Stephen held Luna as if her life depended on it, while Carol whispered prayers through her tears. The hours at the hospital were tormenting. Doctors and nurses came and went from the examination room without offering many answers. Stephen and Carol waited in the corridor, their hands clasped together in silence but full of fear. When the doctor finally appeared, his serious expression made it clear the news wouldn't be good. "Luna has a severe heart condition," the doctor said. "She needs urgent surgery. Without it, she only has a few months to live." Stephen and Carol were stunned. It was as if the ground had vanished beneath their feet. The doctor continued, explaining that the local hospital didn't have the resources to perform the surgery and that Luna would need to be transferred to a larger hospital in a neighboring city. Despite the shock, Stephen tried to remain calm. "What do we need to do, doctor? We'll figure it out. We just want her to get better." But reality proved harsh. The cost of the surgery was astronomical, far beyond what Stephen and Carol could afford. With no car, no savings, and no financial support, it seemed impossible to get Luna the help she needed in time. In the days that followed, their home, once filled with laughter, was consumed by silence and worry. Carol spent hours by Luna's side, stroking her face as the little girl rested, unaware of the gravity of the situation. Stephen, on the other hand, could barely sleep. His mind raced endlessly, searching for a solution. They knew they were facing a battle that would demand everything from them. But one thing was certain: Stephen and Carol wouldn't give up. For Luna, they would do the impossible. After all, she was the reason they fought every day, and nothing in the world mattered more than saving the life of the little girl who had brought light into their lives during their darkest moments. Nights became long and agonizing at Stephen and Carol's house. They took turns caring for Luna, but when she fell asleep, the silence returned and the weight of the situation bore down on them. Sitting at the kitchen table, they looked at the few coins they had, trying to imagine how they could gather such a large sum in so little time. Carol, her head resting in her hands, sighed deeply. Stephen, I've thought of everything but I just can't see a way out. And time is running out. Stephen remained silent for a moment, staring at a small picture frame with a photo of Luna smiling. His eyes, once filled with exhaustion, now gleamed with a spark of determination. He stood up slowly and said firmly, I'm going to save our granddaughter's life. Even if I have to walk to the ends of the earth. Carol looked at him, surprised, not fully understanding what he meant. What are you talking about, Stephen? I'm going to walk to the big city. I know someone there, a businessman. Maybe he can help us. I can't just sit here watching time slip away while Luna's life is at risk. I need to do something. Carol's heart tightened. But how are you going to do that? We don't have a car or money for a bus ticket. That's crazy, Stephen. It's too far. Stephen, with tears in his eyes, held Carol's hands tightly. I have nothing, Carol. But I have faith. And I have love for our granddaughter. That's all I need. If I give up now, what does that say about how we feel for her? I'll go as far as it takes to save our little girl's life. Carol wiped away the tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. She knew she couldn't stop him. Stephen's love for Luna was stronger than any obstacle. Still, the fear of losing him on this journey was real. Promise me you'll take care of yourself, Stephen. Promise that if something goes wrong you'll come back home. Stephen embraced her, feeling the weight of a difficult goodbye. I promise. But nothing will stop me from trying. For her I'll move mountains. The next morning, before sunrise, Stephen packed a small bag with a few clothes, some food, water, and the little money they had. He kissed Luna's forehead as she slept and looked at Carol, who was holding back tears. With determined steps, Stephen set out. The road ahead was long, but he carried something money couldn't buy: unshakable faith and limitless love for his granddaughter. In that moment, no obstacle seemed too big to overcome. The day had barely begun when Stephen took the first steps of his long journey. Before leaving, he hugged Carol tightly, feeling the weight of the farewell and the responsibility he bore. He looked at Luna, still asleep, and whispered, "Wait for me, my little girl. Grandpa will bring the solution." With a simple backpack and a heart full of determination, Stephen began walking. The path was long and challenging. With each step, the sun grew hotter, the fatigue built up, and loneliness followed him like a constant shadow. He passed fields, small villages, and long empty roads where the only sound was his footsteps. As the days went by, physical exhaustion mounted, but Stephen's faith remained unshaken. He prayed as he walked, asking for strength and protection. Whenever discouragement tried to creep into his mind, he thought of Luna's smile and the reason for his journey. When the tall buildings of the city finally came into view, a mix of relief and hope washed over Stephen. He knew there was still much to do, but reaching this point already felt like a victory. Without wasting any time, he headed straight to the office of the businessman he knew. He hoped the man would understand his struggle and offer help. Once there, Stephen told his story. He spoke about Luna, her illness, his long walk, and the faith that kept him going. His words were filled with emotion, and Stephen believed his efforts would finally bear fruit. But to his disappointment, the businessman shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Stephen. I wish I could help, but I can't." The words hit like a blow. Stephen left the office with a heavy heart, but he didn't let himself give up entirely. If he can't help, someone else will, he thought. He decided to visit other businesses, knock on other doors, and share his story with anyone willing to listen. The following days were filled with rejection. With every no, the discouragement threatened to grow, but Stephen refused to quit. Without money for a place to sleep, he spent nights on the streets of the city, searching for a safe corner to rest. Some people who saw him in his simple clothes mistook him for a homeless man and offered food. Stephen accepted with humility and gratitude, thanking God for every meal. In those difficult moments, Stephen found strength in his faith. He knew he was fighting for something far greater than himself. Luna's life, the little girl who had brought joy into his world. Even when it seemed like everything was against him, Stephen kept believing he would find a way. Each day was a struggle, but also an opportunity. He knew that persistence and love were his greatest weapons, and with them he kept moving forward. After all, anyone who walks with a heart full of love never walks alone. After days of frustrating attempts and repeated rejections, Stephen realized he needed to try something different. His determination remained strong, but time was running out. Each no was a painful reminder that Luna's life was hanging by a thread. Then, sitting on a sidewalk with an exhausted mind, he had an idea. With the little money he had left, Stephen bought a piece of cardboard and a marker. He sat down, took a deep breath, and wrote in big, clear letters, "I walked 500 miles to get here to save my 7-year-old granddaughter who is dying. I need help." Holding the sign, he positioned himself on a busy street corner downtown. People rushed past, glancing at him for a moment before continuing on their way. Some smiled awkwardly, others avoided eye contact, but Stephen stood firm. He wasn't there for himself, he was there for Luna. Throughout the day, a few people stopped to leave small amounts of money. Others approached, asked a few questions, and then left without offering help. Although the coins and bills he received were welcome, he knew it wasn't enough. The amount needed to save Luna seemed impossible to reach this way, and despair began to weigh on his shoulders. Still, Stephen refused to give up. As he held the sign, he thought about the promise he had made to Carol. He had told her he would return with a solution, and that kept him standing even when exhaustion threatened to bring him down. Some people judged him. There were those who looked at him with suspicion, as if he were just another beggar trying to deceive others. But Stephen wasn't shaken by that. He knew the truth was in his heart and that his reason for being there was pure. Time passed slowly and day turned to night. The city lights came on as Stephen continued to hold his sign, hoping that someone at some moment would feel moved by his story. But as the hours slipped away, the pressure mounted. Each passing day without a concrete solution was one less day in the fight against Luna's illness. Fear began to intertwine with his determination, forming a lump in his throat. Yet even in those moments of deepest uncertainty, he would look up at the sky and offer a silent prayer. "God, don't let me give up. Show me the way." Stephen knew that what he was doing was a cry for help. A plea that, among so many people and stories, someone would hear his. Someone who had the power to change Luna's fate. He didn't know how much longer he could keep going, but he was determined to stay as long as it took. After all, his love for his granddaughter was greater than any obstacle. It was a day like any other, and Stephen stood at the busy corner, holding his sign with steady hands but a weary heart. The sun was blazing, people hurried by, and he had lost count of how many indifferent glances he'd received that day. Still he remained there, driven by love and faith. Then amidst the crowd, a man in a sharp suit slowed his pace. James was a successful businessman, always busy and surrounded by commitments, but something about the message on the cardboard caught his attention. He stopped, carefully read the sign, and without hesitation approached Stephen. "Sir, what's your story?" James asked, his tone a blend of curiosity and concern. Stephen, surprised that someone was finally willing to listen, lifted his tear-filled eyes. With a trembling voice, he began to tell everything. He spoke about Luna, a 7-year-old girl full of joy and innocence, who had been the light of his life since losing her parents. He shared the devastating diagnosis, the urgent need for surgery, and the lack of resources that left them feeling powerless. He recounted his 500-mile journey, the exhaustion, the nights spent on the streets, and his relentless search for someone who could help them. James listened in silence, but it was clear that Stephen's words were striking a chord with him. When Stephen finished, tears streamed down the grandfather's face. James paused, looking at the man before him who, despite everything, still carried remarkable strength. "I understand your pain," James finally said, his voice thick with emotion. He told Stephen that years ago he had faced a similar situation with his own daughter. "She also needed emergency surgery, and it was the hardest moment of my life. I can't imagine how you've managed this on your own." Stephen simply nodded, unable to find the words. Then James made a decision that would change everything. "I want to meet your granddaughter and your wife. I'll go with you to your home." Stephen was stunned, barely able to believe what he was hearing. "Really? You'd do that for us?" James smiled. "Yes. Let's go now." With tears in his eyes and his heart full of hope, Stephen got into James's luxury car. During the drive they talked more, and Stephen shared stories about the little house he shared with Carol and Luna, their happy days, and how much their granddaughter meant to them. When they arrived, Carol was at the door, surprised to see her husband accompanied by a well-dressed man. Stephen introduced James, explaining that he wanted to meet Luna. Overcome with emotion, Carol welcomed James with tears in her eyes and a hug filled with gratitude. Inside the house, James finally met Luna. Despite her weakened state, the little girl greeted him with a sweet smile and genuine joy. Her bright eyes and innocent voice touched James's heart in a way he couldn't explain. In that moment, James knew what he had to do. He looked at Stephen and Carol and said, "I'm going to help you. I'll make sure Luna gets the surgery and all the care she needs." Stephen and Carol broke down in tears, thanking him over and over. To them, James wasn't just a generous man, he was an angel sent by God to save their granddaughter's life. For James, it was a privilege to be part of their story and bring hope back to their family. James's generosity turned what once seemed impossible into reality. Without delay, he ensured that Luna was transferred to the best hospital in the big city. Everything was arranged quickly, and within days, Luna was under the care of a specialized medical team. Stephen and Carol followed every step, confident yet nervous. When Luna was taken into the operating room, Carol held Stephen's hand tightly, and together they prayed in silence. For them, that moment was the culmination of a battle they had fought with love, faith, and determination. Hours later, the surgeon emerged with a reassuring smile. The surgery was a success. "Luna will be fine." The words felt like a balm for Stephen and Carol's weary souls. They embraced, overwhelmed with emotion as tears of relief streamed down their faces. Luna, the light of their lives, was saved. In the days that followed, Luna's recovery was swift. Soon, the natural sparkle in her eyes and her contagious smile returned. Stephen and Carol couldn't contain their joy as they watched their granddaughter, healthy again, running through the hospital halls and filling the space with life. Grateful for everything James had done, Stephen and Carol decided to express their gratitude in a special way. Stephen, with his simple yet heartfelt words, wrote a letter recounting not only the journey they had endured but also the profound impact James's kindness had on their lives. Carol, using her artistic talent, painted a picture of Luna and James together, with a glowing heart in the background, symbolizing life, love, and hope. When they presented the gift to James, he was deeply moved. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice trembling. "It was a privilege to help. Seeing Luna healthy and happy is the greatest reward I could ask for." James reaffirmed his commitment to be there for the family whenever they needed him. To him, Stephen, Carol, and Luna had become more than acquaintances. They were now a part of his life. When Luna finally returned home, the small, simple house that had once been filled with tears and worry was again brimming with laughter and joy. Luna's smile lit up every corner, and Stephen and Carol felt as though a new chapter had begun, one filled with possibilities and hope.